Okay, today we're going to build a Hello World program with Rust. Now we're going to go a little bit further than simply printing out Hello World. We're going to add some functions on top of that and play around with input and output. So why don't we get started with this? If you don't already have Rust and Cargo installed, you can go over to rustup.rs in your browser and then run this curl command to download that. I already have it installed, so I'm just going to jump right into it here. I'm going to open up a new project using Cargo. I'm going to call it Hello World Plus. Very exciting name, I know. So we go into this project and I'm going to open it up in my code editor. For this example, I'm using a code editor called Zed. It doesn't matter which one you use though. You can use VS Code or Sublime Text or Notepad. Just kidding about that last one, it won't help you too much, but to each their own. So here we've got a Hello World program, just the default what comes out of a new Cargo project. Some things to note: it's a simple function that doesn't take any arguments, it doesn't return any values, more on that later, and it calls this print line macro. The fact that it's a macro doesn't matter too much in this case, but you'll know that it's a macro because of that exclamation point. And here we just specify some text. We don't put any variables in it. It's just going to print this every time we run it. And how do we run it? In my terminal here, I'm going to go cargo run, and it's just going to run this project after compiling. In this case, it's going to print out exactly what we put there, hello world. Alright, so we've basically done the hello world that you'll see, anywhere on the internet. Let's make this slightly more interesting. Let's have a function that greets. So for this function, I'm going to define it called greet, and it's going to take a name, and that name is going to be of type a borrowed string. Okay, it's not going to have any return arguments just yet, but I'm going to take my print line function and I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to replace where it says world with whatever the name is. Now there's two ways to put the name in here. I can either insert it as an argument after the string, or I can insert it right here within the string. This might be a little bit more clear that where the variables fly in, because if you have several variables you'll have a list of arguments out here, but again, it's just a matter of preference. To actually call this function now, I'm going to put it into the main function, and instead of putting the original hello world string, I'm going to put my name. And let's try to run this. Hello. Okay, great. So now that we've got a greeting function, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's give it a return type. In this case, I'm going to have it return a whole string. And to set a variable in Rust, you'll create a let binding. So I'm going to assign to a variable called greeting the result of greet Ian. Right now, this function does not return the string, it merely prints something out, but the return type is void in this case. So let's make it actually return something. To do this, I'm going to call the format function. It works similarly to print line, except instead of printing it to the console, it's going to assign it to a variable. And to make this clear, I'm just going to put another binding right here. Let variable equal format of hello name. Let's make this a little different too, just so we can tell it's different from the previous command. Exclamation points all around. And in Rust, the last line of your function is what's going to get returned. So in this case, the variable is being assigned right here, and then we're returning it from the function right here. I could remove this line and just leave the format as the last line as well, but we're just doing an example for educational purposes. Okay, so if I were to run this, Oh, I gotta save the file first. It's going to tell me that greeting is not being used. This is the Rust compiler helping us out with our unused variables. So let's actually print that out since we removed the print line. And in order to print it out, you'll have to put the whole template string. Hello Ian, welcome to Rust. Okay, so we have a function that greets us. That's very nice, but it's not very interactive still. In order to pass this argument in here, I had to hard code it into the main function up here. Now that's pretty, it's not very useful. In order to get something useful, it would be a lot nicer if we can get some input from the user of the program. So to do that, I'm going to create a different function. It's going to be called getUserGreeting, and it's going to return a string, and it's going to ask us, or it's going to ask whoever's using this, what's your name? Okay. We want to grab some input from the user, and to do that, we need to import a library from the Rust standard library. To do that, I'm going to call use std : io, and what this will do is it will give us access to a function that allows us to call standard input. And off that, I can call readLine, and I need to give it some kind of input to save the variable. So let's do that. I'm going to create a mutable variable called input, and it's going to be a string, a new string. So we'll talk about the differences between this borrowed string and between this owned string in a bit. But for now, let's just get this thing working. Since it's a mutable variable, I need to pass it to the readLine function with this &mute keyword. And this is going to return a result, and I'm going to expect that it works. And if it doesn't work, it's going to print out an error that says failed to read input. Okay. And then once we've gotten the input, then we can say, I'm just going to copy over the format string from above and put that input in there. So we don't need this anymore. And for that greeting, I'll just replace it with the getUserGreeting we just defined. Okay, so what did we do here? It's going to print to the console, what's your name? We're going to assign a variable to an empty string called input right here. Then we're going to use the standard IO library to read in a line into the input. If it fails, it'll say failed to read input. And then after that variable is assigned to the input, we're going to call format to create a format string with it placed in there. Okay, so let's try to run this. So you'll see that the terminal is asking, what's your name? I'll put my name. I'll hit enter, and then it says, hello Ian, and then exclamation point, welcome to Rust. That's funny. So it didn't trim the new line from the input I just entered, so it thinks that I actually intended to put this return right here. That's a little annoying, so let's actually trim that part out. Since this is just like a basic string, we can call the trim method on it, and this will remove any white space like backslashes or tabs or anything that are beginning or trailing the string. Running that one more time. My name in lowercase this time. Hello, welcome to Rust. Very good. So let's quickly go over some of the interesting concepts we learned in this. We learned how to create a function. We know that we can print to the console using print line and then inserting a template string. There's two ways to do a template string. You can either put the variable right into the curly braces, or in this case down here, you can put the template string and then follow it with the arguments you want to pass into that template string. In this case, we wanted to call trim on the input so that way we can get rid of the preceding and succeeding white space. Okay, we learned how to take input from the user. Say you're making a command line prompt or something like that. You know that you can set up a variable and then pass it to the standard in like this. And then one other thing that we took a look at is this expectation right here. So readLine returns an IO result. That type means that it's either going to come back successfully or it's going to fail. And for this example, I just want to check that it's successful and otherwise do nothing about it. So if it fails, it would just say failed to read input. Yeah, but in this example, nothing's going to fail, unfortunately, so we can't really test that. And then one other thing that we learned is there's some kind of difference between string and a borrowed string. Now, in this case, we're dealing with the owned string, that is like the capital S string. But if we were to pass this to a function, we might want to pass just the reference to it instead of cloning it and creating new variables. More on that in a different video. I think we've already exceeded our time here. But thanks for watching.